it is actually in Chan's chart why he's not really someone who is active on social media. And by this, I mean we look at his chart as a whole in terms of the hemispheres, and yeah, I'll show you what I'm talking about. So this is what I'm talking about, and if you look just right above here, that's the ascendant line, and it's what we call the horizon line. So when we have more planets beneath the horizon line, it indicates that the person is more likely to be kept to themselves, a bit more private, but also they're not really going to have a lot of bad press about them. Now, the other thing I also want to note is that a lot of the planets that are below his horizon line are all the fast-moving planets. So there's his Sun, his Mercury, the Moon, his Mars, his Venus, all of that is there. So yeah, long story short, even though he is someone who is in the spotlight, in the limelight, he is someone by nature who is more likely to keep to themselves and therefore not really be too public, whether that's social media or what gets put out in the news. And the fact that his biggest scandal at this point is a rumor that he may have had BBLs, which I think is absolutely fucking hilarious. I think that says a lot. It occurred to me just earlier. I discovered a new aspect of astrology today, which is relocation charts. Now, what a relocation chart is that if you decide to move to another state or another country, your birth chart actually also changes a little bit. So, I decided to actually do one for Bangchan, but because he was born in Korea, that means that him living there at the moment is the same as what his birth chart actually is. So I wanted to have a look at what his birth chart would adjust to when he's in Australia. So in terms of his planets, there's not really much that changes, but his ascendant sign, his rising sign, does change from Gemini into Taurus. And the other things I found really interesting is that the houses that his planets are in also change when he's in Australia. Since he spent most of his childhood in Australia, I'm just only going to read him as a kid with a Taurus rising sign. So a child with Taurus rising tends to be very affectionate, very cuddly, but also there is a big aspect in wanting to help out the family, and even with an influence of starting to earn money for the family at a young age. Now I find this really interesting because we do know that Bangchan started acting in commercials quite young, so yeah, interesting connection there. But the other thing I find really interesting is that his sun moves from the 5th house to the 4th house. Now the 4th house is about like family. So I find this really interesting because it also makes sense because his family's in Australia, but when he's in Australia, there is a huge focus on family and just essentially, domestic and family concerns. So when he's in Australia, in particular in Sydney, family and family relationships take precedence over his career. That becomes the number one energy in his life. And then his moon moves from the 6th house into the 5th house. So I've mentioned in a previous video that the 5th house is about pleasure, joy, but in this case, it's also about romance. So with his moon being in the 5th house in Australia, this is just sort of like the vibe I'm getting, but it is actually very possible that he may meet or have his soulmate someone who is also within Australia. I'll look into other things a little bit more, but yeah, that's all I've got for now. I feel like I didn't really explain relocation charts very well in the previous video, so I'm going to go through it a little bit more in depth from my understanding because this is still quite new to me as well. So if you were confused about what a relocation chart is, keep watching. So in astrology, when we have the natal chart, which is the birth chart, that is the energy that we are born into, and that is calculated with our birthday, our birth time, but also the place. So when we relocate to a different state, city, country, the alignment of the planets and the stars also change depending on where we go. So when we are in a new place, there are different energies that are more prominent in our life. And that's basically what the relocation chart is. It shows us which energies become more prominent and how that changes with our birth chart. I'm going to use myself as an example in this case. So I lived in Japan for this up as information on how relocation charts work, but it's just a kind of like a vibe, a feeling that I'm getting from it all, and just sort of like putting it together with natal charts and also astrocartography. And what I'm talking about is, so when we have our planets move into different houses, I feel like that can signify certain things that may happen in those places that you travel to. Just like when you are using astrocartography and you are traveling on one of your lines, say like if you're traveling along your sun line, you tend to have a lot more good luck. If you travel along your Jupiter line, then you are likely to find new opportunities for expansion. So in that same sense, I feel like the houses also affect the planets and certain events in life that could happen. So just to refer back to the video I did of Bang-chan, with his moon being in the 5th house when he's in Australia, that creates more of a focus around joy, pleasure, but also finding romantic relationships, finding that romantic partner, which is why I feel like that may signify that his partner is more likely to be in Australia rather than in Korea, or that they may meet in Australia instead. And then using my chart as a comparison, because I have my moon move into the 4th house instead of the 5th house, and the 4th house being very focused on family, there is a likelihood that maybe perhaps in future when I start a family, it may be towards in the area of like maybe Japan or South Korea, because my chart seems to be the same for both areas. Now, if I pair that with my astrocartography and what I know of the lines that go through Japan and South Korea for me, there tends to be, well, it looks like that if I am over there and if I am in a partnership, I will likely to be more focused on family and my partner compared to when I'm in Australia. So essentially the whole thing with astrology, what I find really interesting about it is because I don't read, or I'm learning this very slowly, but I don't just read the birth chart by itself. I quite like to piece things together from different aspects to create a bigger picture and a fuller picture. And by using the birth chart, the relocation chart, and astrocartography, I'm finding that it is starting to show me how things can come together. And this is part 2 about relocation charts. I don't care if I have COVID. And I found something really interesting and unexpected. So we all know that he has triple Libra, but interestingly enough, he actually has more Aquarian energy in his chart than he does Libra. Finding this out was a bit more of a process with the online calculators, but I got there, and with the report it actually shows that because Uranus is Bang-chan's dominant planet in his chart, 20% of his chart is Aquarian energy. In comparison, his chart only has 14% Libran energy. Now what this means is that there are a lot of transits in his chart that include Uranus, and therefore it actually exaggerates that Aquarian energy. I don't think I can fit all of it on the screen, but essentially there are 8 transits in total that includes Uranus on his chart. So what this means is that he has a lot of Aquarian qualities that will show through in different areas of his personality and his life. Now, I find this very interesting as an Aquarian myself, because I always found it fascinating that for some reason I felt like I could relate to him on a lot of levels, but I don't actually have any Libra in my chart. After realizing this though, it made so much sense. On top of that, his Uranus is actually in Aquarius, so that also hits even harder. I could have said this at the beginning of the video, but Uranus is actually the ruling planet for Aquarius, and so with Uranus being in Aquarius, then yeah, that's why the energy is even stronger. I'll have to do a separate reading to go through all of his Uranus aspects. But some of the qualities that I do see in him that are very Aquarian include being very idealistic, being very independent, being very self-reliant, and I also feel that he is quite progressive. I've recently learned about... Alright, one more reading and I swear I'll go to sleep because it's 2 a.m. More interesting things about Bang Chan's chart is that he actually has intercepted and duplicated houses. So this happens when using the Placidus system sometimes. And essentially, in the most basic way that I can explain it is that when it comes to our birth chart, if a house does not fall into a sign, like there's no house for that sign whatsoever, then that is called an intercepted house. And because the chart is symmetrical, that means also the sign directly across it is also intercepted. And in this case, what ends up happening is that there will also be two signs that end up having two houses instead. So rather than showing the actual round chart, I'm just going to show the listed chart instead so it's easier to see. But there is actually no house that has Scorpio or Taurus as a sign in it. But we do have Cancer being in two houses and Capricorn being in two houses. Now, from what I've been researching and reading, when this occurs in someone's chart, it's actually a very big karmic lesson that is coming from their past life into their present life. So essentially, in his past life, these areas were something that he either ignored or didn't work on. And so it's come back with a vengeance, and it's going to be something that he can't ignore in this lifetime. So essentially, because these signs show a karmic imbalance, then this lifetime is supposed to be rectifying it and creating balance within his energy again. So for future incarnations, he can have a more balanced energy. However, like, the really important thing to keep in mind is that just because if someone has something like this in their chart where there is an interception, it's no need to feel like that, you know, you have failed in a past life or anything like that, because we all go through challenges in general, and a lifetime is kind of like a chapter in a very, 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 very long book of our soul's existence. So Chris, on the off chance that you actually see this and you are learning this about yourself, just remind yourself that this is not something that you need to beat yourself up on, because it will touch on areas on that you do struggle, which I'll have to do a part 2 for, but it's okay and you will get there. Because Chan has made it publicly known that he does struggle with loving himself and confidence. And interestingly enough, it actually is related to this. Taurus is a sign that essentially brings the energy of where you can spoil yourself. It is ruled by Venus. It is like, it's luxury. It's just all those like nice, fun things that you can do for yourself. But Chan doesn't have this in any of his houses. What this translates to is that there is a very high likelihood, which we do know about because he has confirmed it, of the lack of self-love. And so what happens here is that when you lack this in your houses and in your chart, then there's a lot of like seeking external validation rather than it having come from within. Can also indicate having one's confidence and security being crushed at a young age, which probably happened when he was a trainee. So the big lesson here for intercepted Taurus as a sign is, as he matures, Chris, okay, listen up. As you mature, you need to learn how to connect to yourself more and to listen to yourself. when I say listen to yourself, I don't mean listen to those negative self comments. I mean really like dig deep, because you are meant to learn a sense of self-love in this lifetime. So as you mature and go through your Saturn return and likely have like a serious relationship, you will learn that your self-worth is not determined by how people see you. In time, you will understand that the things that you do and the way that you feel about how you make an impact on the world, how you make an impact with your music, is going to be enough, and that you don't need external validation in order to have that self-love and self-worth. I hate leaving things unfinished. So